how much of this could have been prevented? And I'm talking about specifically because when you hear the stories, and I'm talking to friends, so some of the guys are like, I cannot believe this, Pat. How can you defend this? What is this about cooperating? They should have never done this. This guy should be with his family right now. He's a good guy. And then you hear the other argument. Why is the state not cooperating? All they have to do is cooperate for this to be prevented. When Obama was deporting the millions of people, how come the news wasn't as bad? Well, maybe because the local cities and states were cooperating with them by giving the report, and they weren't. So to the average person, how would you unpack that message that they're not cooperating with D.C.?
Some of that I want to get to the bottom of because I don't think I know, because I'm hearing evidence on both sides. So I hear from the DHS, Minneapolis is sanctuary city, and they're not cooperating. Mm-hmm. But then I hear from the director of prisons there, that's what I've seen on TV, saying that the one guy, this sex offender that everybody agrees is terrible, is in prison. It's on a public website. They could have called us, and instead they're going around breaking doors down everywhere looking for him, and he's in prison, and he has what's called a detainer. We will turn him over to ICE once he has served his sentence. And so that's what you hear from the Minneapolis people. From the other side, you hear at Sanctuary said they're not doing. There has to be a truth. So like a jury, I present you with both of those, and you say, well, I need more information. So I think my job is to try to bring them in. I'm going to try to bring in not only the people from DHS, from ICE and others to let us know what is the policy, what is an assault, what isn't an assault, what can people do, and how can we try to figure out how not to have any more deadly killings. But I also want to know, is Minneapolis cooperating or aren't they? And so we're going to have to hear from the Minneapolis people, and then we're going to have to hear from the Republicans or the DHS people. Give us examples of how they weren't. But also, if this guy is in prison, how come you didn't know it? Did you call Minneapolis and they told you no? Or are you at such odds that you aren't talking to Minneapolis?
I don't know if it's not at odds, because Trump will talk to anybody, right? Even Elizabeth Warren doing what she did in this video, Trump called her to say, hey, what do you think about the 10% interest rate, right, for credit cards? He talked to Tim Walz, to apparently Jacob Fry, and on the call, he says the call was good, but then Fry comes out and, says what he says. So there's politics also being played. And then there's even some people saying that what story disappeared all of a sudden? The Somali daycare center no longer being talked about. So is this a good story that now got that to be gone? And then Tim Walz is now saying he doesn't plan on running for office at all again. He just wants to go be a good citizen and do his thing.
I think the fraud's not over. Whether it's misdirection and they're trying to steer us away from that, possibly. But we're going to have a debate this week. We're having it on spending in Congress. And what I'm pointing out is something that Republicans don't want people to know. Their spending package has more refugee welfare in it. And my point is, if you think they're stealing the refugee welfare, you need to not give them any more until something's figured out. You got to figure out a way. So there's $5 billion in the package again for refugee welfare. I'm going to have an amendment that will strike that will remove that completely, because look, I'm not against refugees, but if you or your church want to sponsor a refugee, you do it with your money. That's charity. If you're trying to take all the taxpayer money to do it for 100,000 Somalis, that's not charity. That is maybe a bad public policy decision, frankly, to do it. And so we need to look at all of this, and we need to look at who's coming, who's not coming. We need to have rules on our immigration, basically.
That's common sense, though. You see, how is a common sense approach like that not landing with people on both sides? Meaning, when you look at who takes the most, entitlement programs that we have, who gets the most welfare, who stays on it the longest. Back in the days during Obama, remember when unemployment was past 6 months, 12 months, even at one point, people were getting it for 24 months. Oh, because I have a hard time getting a job. I have a hard time getting a job. We moved it to 90 days. Everybody got a job all of a sudden.
Yeah, economists have studied this over and over again. If unemployment lasts 28 weeks, almost everybody gets a job either between 27 weeks and 29 weeks. If unemployment is 52 weeks, everybody gets a job 51. About 51 weeks to 53 weeks, funny. Right around there. And here's the other thing, and this is how, if you look at public policy, you see the unintended consequences of things. So they've also done this study. So you and I go in for an interview. You've been out of work for 2 years, and I've been out of work for 2 months.
Sure.
Who do you think they hire?
2 months.
Yeah. Because if you've been out of work 2 years, they think something's wrong with you.
That's right.
You've lost work ethic and you're not trying hard enough. Because frankly, what would always happen is, and this is what still happens, people take jobs they don't want to get by until they can get another job they like better. But if you provide them with welfare or unemployment benefits, they don't get that other job. But it also scares off the employer. And so really extending unemployment to a longer period is actually a disservice to the people you're doing it to, because the longer they're out of work, the less likely anyone will ever employ them.
That's the part, though. Why allow somebody to be on entitlement program for 10 years?
Yeah.
Why allow them to get welfare for 10 years? If
Right.
it's for 3, 6, 12 months, get a job, take care of yourself like everybody else. Some states allow that, some don't. That to me is common sense.
You have to have guardrails around everything. You know, one of the things my dad used to say is we don't necessarily need a wall. What we need is a wall around the welfare system. And so you have to have rules. So able-bodied people shouldn't be on food stamps. So if you are able-bodied and single, if you're a 21-year-old guy, 21-year-old woman, there's no reason to be on food stamps. And in fact, when food stamps started, they were for the single mom with 4 kids who everybody says, well, she ought to work, but what can she do? She's got 4 kids. And so we acknowledge we'd take care of some people who couldn't take care of themselves so they wouldn't starve. But a 21-year-old boy or girl, frankly, there are jobs everywhere, particularly for men. Because if you can lift stuff and you're physically able, there is a job for you.
For sure, I agree. But with that policy also did. If you're talking about the Lyndon Johnson 1964, when they came out with taking care of single mothers with 4 kids, at the time the focus was to help the single mother with 4 kids. But it also inspired a lot of single women to become single mothers with 4 kids, because they saw the benefit of relying on the government to give them income and without having to work. So not only was it a bad policy, it produced a lot of people that were relying on the government to take care of them.
Yeah. There was a book written a while back, and it separated the population into sort of 2 tracks. And they said, well, these people are at the 90 percentile as far as income and everything else. These people are at the 10 percentile. And they said, what are the differences between these 2 groups? And the difference was primarily education and having children before you're married. And I tell people this all the time because I think it's incredibly important, but I can't make a law. I can't tell you you can't have kids. I can't tell you can't have.
Create incentives, though, where like you create incentives to
possibly.
What's the country that said if you're married for I
Hungary.
don't know how many years and you have your 3rd kid,
Hungary.
Hungary is who? Okay,
Yeah, I'm not opposed to things like, reduction in taxes. I don't think we should give you money because we don't have any money, frankly. We're $2 trillion in the hole each year. We're $38 trillion in the hole overall. So I'm not for like saying, I'll give you $1,000 to not have kids. They were doing the opposite in Hungary. They're giving you $1,000 to have kids.
How bad was the childbirth rate?
Well, because in Europe, all of Europe's underwater, and U.S. is becoming that.
1.58 is pretty bad in U.S.
Yeah.
Worst
So
ever. Yeah.
we're becoming that. But I think the bottom line is there are things that need to change in society and problems we have, but there isn't necessarily always a governmental answer. So, for example, having kids before you're married, almost inevitably, if your parents are rich, you can do it, but almost inevitably leads to a life of struggling economically and poverty. So what I would do is I would actually make that part of the curriculum, not from a moral standpoint, not to say morally you're evil if you're having sex before you're married. I would say, these are the statistics, and in all likelihood, you will be poor. So if you'll do things to try to prevent having children when you're 15, 16, 17, you have a chance. You have a much better chance of getting ahead.
Yeah, it's a great conversation. And the thing is, we have the data to make better decisions. It's not like we don't have the data to see what produces and what doesn't. Was it yesterday or 2 days ago, you and Marco Rubio had a good exchange? I think it was it yesterday?
Yeah.
Yesterday, yeah.
It's hard for us to conceive that an operation that lasted about 4.5 hours and was a law enforcement operation to capture someone we don't recognize as a head of state, indicted in the United States, wanted with a $50 million bounty.
My question would be, if it only took 4 hours to take our president, it's very short, nobody dies on the other side, nobody dies on our side, it's perfect. Would it be an act of war?
We just don't believe that this operation comes anywhere close to the constitutional definition of war.
But would it be an act of war if someone did it to us? Nobody dies, few casualties, they're in and out. Boom, it's a perfect military operation. Would that be an act of war? Of course it would be an act of war. I'm probably the most anti-war person in the Senate, and I would vote to declare war if someone invaded our country and took our president.
And you were talking to him about Venezuela, with going in and taking Maduro, and if that were to happen to us, would that not be considered war? How would we react to it, right? If you don't mind kind of taking a minute and give your argument on that, because I have some questions on that.
So we had the debate during our constitutional convention over how war should begin. Should one person have the power, the president, or should we give that power to the legislature? And it was pretty much unanimous from Hamilton to Jefferson. We're going to give the power to initiate or declare war to Congress. That's what the Constitution says. Now, executing the war, we have a president who's the commander-in-chief, and really most all of the decisions about how to execute or how to fight a war are the president's prerogative. And so we had this debate over what happened in Venezuela. They say, well, it's not a constitutional war. And we say, well, why? And their lawyers all get together and they say, well, because there weren't enough people who died. And so it was so quick. They're in and out. The war's already over. How do you say we're at war? And so my question is, well, if that wasn't a war, would it be a war if a country came in, bombed D.C. and the U.S. such that we couldn't respond with air defense missiles, flew in, and then took our president, and then they arranged their armada up and down the East Coast to blockade our East Coast? Would that be an act of war? And I said, look, I'm one of the most anti-war people you'll ever meet. I don't like war. I think war is the last resort. I'll vote to declare war when someone tells me it snatches our president, attacks us. So it is an act of war. And logic doesn't work. And it's like, oh, you're saying moral equivalency to us and Maduro. No, I'm not. I think Maduro is a scoundrel. Socialism's bad. Authoritarian's bad. I wrote a whole book called The Case Against Socialism, against Maduro and against that the Venezuelan socialism. And yet, logic is what it is. If that's not a war, then why would it be a war? Would not, it would have to be not a war if someone attacked us. It's the same with the drug bust. We're like, well, he's violated the laws against oil and drugs and stuff. Well, those are our laws. We also accuse Maduro, who is a terrible person, but we accused him of having machine guns, violating a 1934 U.S. law. What's the dumbest thing I've ever heard? We can't arrest people from foreign countries for breaking American laws when they are not even here breaking the American laws. It's just really, really dumb. But they're saying it's a drug bust because at first it's not big enough to be a real war, and then really it's not a war, it's a drug bust. So they're trying to convince people they don't have to come to us and ask. But there are threats now of putting more troops in. If they don't behave, we've threatened to put more troops in. Do they have to ask for permission then? I think it's always better. It's what the Constitution intended. And we have on very important occasions asked Congress. When we were attacked at Pearl Harbor, when we were attacked at 9/11, Congress was virtually unanimous. And the people were behind the effort, at least in the first decade or so of the Afghan war.
Do you think it was a right move?
Taking out what? Yeah, I would have voted for declaration of war after 9/11.
You would have,
yeah.
Okay,
and virtually everybody did. Even my father voted for that at the time. And I would have voted also with Pearl Harbor after we were attacked at Pearl Harbor. But I wouldn't have voted for the Iraq War. The Iraq War, we didn't have the same consensus, and it also misdirected us and was done under misinformation. The misinformation was that, Iraq, has weapons of mass destruction, is threatening to attack us, or that they were part of 9/11. There was actually the intimation by George W. Bush that really they were responsible for 9/11. It just wasn't true.
Well, we learned that 20 years later, and $3 trillion, and how many amount of lives that we lost there. When we set out to create a shoe that blends comfort, function, and luxury, we had the choice to make it fast. We had the choice to make it cheap. We chose neither. Instead, we chose Tuscan Italy. We chose true Italian craftsmanship, each pair touched by 50 skilled hands. We chose patience, spending 2 years perfecting every detail, and we chose the finest quality at every step. Introducing the Future Looks Bright collection. Not rushed, not disposable, not ordinary. Rather, intentional, luxurious, timeless. If you enjoyed this video, you want to watch more videos like this, click here. And if you want to watch the entire podcast, click here.